Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first program. In Symposia Central, we discuss important topics that affect everyone across the globe, but our approach is to take a back seat and allow the leading experts to do the talking. For today's program, we will discuss probably the most debated topic in political economy, capitalism versus socialism, but with a focus on poverty and unemployment. The leading experts to discuss this topic are Professor Richard Wolff, who earned his PhD in economics from Yale University, has taught in several universities such as Yale University, University of Massachusetts, and he is currently a visiting professor in the New School University. He is also the founder of Democracy at Work, which is a non-profit organization that produces media and live events based on his book, Democracy at Work, A Cure for Capitalism. You can find the YouTube channel in the description box where there are lectures and other video materials by Professor Wolff. As you might have noticed already from the title of his book, Professor Wolff will be arguing for socialism as the most effective system in tackling poverty and unemployment. In defending capitalism as the best system, we have Professor Walter Block. He earned his PhD in economics at Columbia University. He is the author of more than 500 refereed articles in professional journals and 24 books. He is currently a professor of economics at Loyola University in New Orleans. His most popular book is Defending the Undefendables, which has been translated in 12 languages, where he defends groups of people usually stigmatized in society, such as prostitutes, blackmailers, or misers, and further proposes these people may in fact benefit the society. His arguments are based on free market economy, i.e. capitalism. You can find the link to the book in the description box. To start the discussion off, Professor Wolff, could you please explain why socialism is a good system to tackle poverty and unemployment as opposed to capitalism?
Well, the basic reason is that socialism does not need and does not want to make one particular aspect of an economic system or a society the bottom line, the thing to which everything else is subordinated. Capitalism does that with profit. It basically says to every business person, profit is what you're here to do. If you get profit, you will be rewarded. If you don't get profit, you will be punished. Consequently, all the other aspects of social and economic life get put second, third, fourth, or out of the picture altogether. And that's why you have the perpetual problems of poverty, unemployment, inequality, the instability of the system with its recurring business cycles. You get what capitalism dishes out because it is monomaniacally focused on one particular aspect in a kind of fundamentalist, in the religious sense, notion that if you just take care of this one thing, everything else will sort itself out. And if I can quote, we'll have the best of all possible worlds because seeking the maximum profit is the royal road to the best outcome for everybody. Socialism basically is an alternative that puts the variety of human needs out there as equal or at least comparable objectives, and that decisions about investment or anything else have to take into account all of the consequences as best they can, rather than privileging the profits, which, as you know, are the sorts of income that accrue to a small minority of the population, namely the employers, and as a consequence are fundamentally unfair.
So that concludes your first section, yeah?
Absolutely.
Professor Walter Block, your time.
Well, I'm delighted to be in this debate with Richard Wolff, a very famous economist, and I'm sure we'll have a lot of fun interacting with each other. I'd never quite heard capitalism put in quite that way, that profits uber alles. If I could put words in Richard's mouth, I'm sure that he would accept that as a good summary of what he said. I would just add a friendly amendment. Also, private property rights play an important role, but I don't think we have a dispute on that. But I'm willing to accept profits as the be-all and end-all. I think profits are great. Profits are wonderful. Profits pervade the entire economy. I have a pen right here. And when I bought this pen, I paid $1 for it. How much did I value that pen for when I bought it? I don't know, more than $1. Otherwise, I wouldn't have bought it for $1. Let's say I bought it for let's say I valued it at $1.50. Well, then I made a profit of 50 cents. I don't see anything wrong with that. On the other hand, the guy who sold me this pen, he must have valued it less than $1. Otherwise, he wouldn't have sold it to me because he wants to make a profit too. Let's suppose he valued it at 75 cents. Well, he made a 25-cent profit. Profits pervade the free society, and there's nothing wrong with profits. Profits, I just gave a case of buying and selling. A barter, I trade a pickle for a chicken, and I value the chicken more than the pickle, and the guy who gets the pickle values the pickle more than the chicken, and we each gain ex ante necessarily, ex post usually, but not necessarily. The employment and employer relationship. I work for Loyola University. They pay me a salary. I value the deal more. I make a profit out of it, and so do they. Well, I'm not sure if they do. I have tenure now, and I think they'd like to get rid of me, but that's another point. But at the time that they hired me, they made a profit. Lending, borrowing, employing, every activity that we engage in, even voluntary socialism is profitable. I join a kibbutz or a commune or whatever, and I benefit to a greater extent than otherwise my alternative costs, my opportunity costs. So profits, profits are everywhere, and thank God for profits. There's nothing wrong with profits. The reason we have poverty.
30 seconds left, Professor Walter.
I'm sorry?
You have 30 seconds left.
Oh, okay. The reason we have poverty and unemployment and business cycles is not because of capitalism, it's because of the absence of capitalism. It's because of government interference with the capitalist profitable system.
Professor Richard, your response?
Okay, and remind me how many minutes I have?
3 minutes.
Okay. One of the ways you can defend profit is by so generalizing and extending its definition that it encompasses all kinds of things that hopefully your listener will think are reasonable. I perfectly understand that if I have an exchange with another person, we can both benefit because we have valuing differences about objects. I don't think that has anything to do with profit. By profit, I mean the difference a corporation gets from it subtracting its costs from its revenues. It is not a subjective factor, it is an objective factor. It's something that you can see, you can keep an account book of. How much we value something, you yourself stumbled at the beginning because it is a complicated thing to understand. There's a vast field of psychology which tries to do that. Most of the evaluations we put on things are full of contradictions. We love them and hate them. We want them, we don't want them. Much of our lives is spent trying to sort all that out, and we usually die well before we achieve this objective, number one. Number two, I'm not worried that there is profit here, there, or the next place. What I was concerned about was profit as the be all and end all. Corporations, for example, do an enormous number of things that I find to be ethically, morally, politically, economically horrendous. And they do it to make more profits. Right now in the world, employers are doing everything they can to get the workers back to work. The result of the virus. They are not willing to spend the money to make the workplace safe. They are wanting to get the workers back there to make a profit, which requires not having spent the money to make it safe. Profit is killing people, as it always does. It would be much better to have a different set of objectives that put profit in the mix, but all together with a whole bunch of other things that are at least as valuable. As to the last point, we do fundamentally disagree. I love this game in which I point out a flaw of capitalism, and the answer is, oh no, that's not a flaw of capitalism, that's somebody else's fault. I can understand that capitalists have long gotten away with literal murder by constantly firing people, throwing them out of their homes, underpaying them, and when called on that, they blame the government. What a wonderful—
You have 30 seconds left, Professor Richard.
What a wonderful arrangement. The only thing it leaves out, besides the service done to the capitalist, is the fact that you have to explain why the government does it. I think the government does what it does because it is dominated and controlled by the people who get the profits, who make it function in a particular way, which should surprise no one, advantages those who pay the piper.
Professor Walter, your response, you have 3 minutes.
Yes, well, thanks for Richard's response. I'm enjoying this immensely, as I think he is also. Look, we both look alike, except for he's been to a barber. I haven't. Otherwise, you know, we have glasses. We're about the same age. We're just having great fun here. I have to distinguish between crony capitalism and laissez-faire capitalism, just as I would distinguish between voluntary socialism and coercive socialism. Voluntary socialism is a kibbutz, commune, whatever. Coercive socialism is, I guess, you know, North Korea, East Germany, USSR, Cuba. I think Richard is quite correct in attacking crony capitalism, but I don't favor crony capitalism. Crony capitalism is a system where very rich people pay off government bureaucrats and politicians and get special favors and tariffs and protections and too big to fail and get all sorts of things like that. And I certainly don't favor that. I only favor laissez-faire capitalism. But I disagree. Firing, somehow there's something wrong with firing someone. Well, how about quitting? Quitting and firing are equal. I don't see why firing is bad and underpaying. There ain't no such thing as underpaying. Look, Richard, I now offer you $1 to come to New Orleans and wash my car. Are you interested? Obviously not. But the point is, if he agreed to do it, then it couldn't be underpaying. Look, suppose I offered him $1 million and to come wash my car, or $1 billion, I'm sure he would accept it. Namely, pay is the embodiment of an agreement between consenting adults, or as Robert Nozick would call it, capitalist acts between consenting adults. So if two people agree to be paid, well, then there can't be any underpaying ex ante, maybe ex post, but then if there's underpaying or overpaying ex post, you can quit or you can be fired. Let's take an example of poverty. I think one of the greatest reasons Richard says I'm sort of hiding behind stuff. Well, let's try the minimum wage law. I think the minimum wage law creates unemployment for unskilled workers, which creates a lot of poverty. And this is not part of the market. This is part of the crony capitalist system. And by the way, the crony capitalists are not just corporations, they're also unions, and labor unions are also supporting this. And about this, you have to make the workplace safe. Well, there's monetary wages and then there's non-monetary wages, and that's part of the deal also. If the workers don't like lack of safety or whatever, they should go somewhere else. And usually the employer will have an incentive to allocate money wages and non-money wages in such a way as to make the best offer he can to his workers. So look, if you're going to test drive a new airplane—
Professor Wolff, if you could finish off your argument, you're a little bit over time.
Sorry, I'll stop now.
Okay, that's fine. So yeah, Professor Richard, your response.
Okay, what you call crony capitalism is the only kind that I'm aware of has ever existed anywhere. Capitalism has always used the government from the beginning of the transition from feudalism to capitalism right down to this very minute. Capitalists, for very good reasons, have understood that part of their profit objective depends on what the government does, how it does it, where it does it, and when it does it. To be disrespectful of the importance of government is a sure way to disappear. As a capitalist, they've understood it, and they work very hard. We know here in the United States the amount of money given by corporations to parties, to political candidates, to armies of lobbyists that do the work for the politicians, all the rest of it. And if we didn't see it before, the last few decades should have made it abundantly or super abundantly clear. For someone who stresses a difference between voluntary and coercive, if you quit, that's kind of a voluntary decision you make. If you're fired, that's not your voluntary decision. You're fired by your employer, who really does have the cards. Look, there's a long tradition in human history of dividing the economic system into two major roles. In slavery, we know them, master and slave. In feudalism, we know them, lord and serf. In capitalism, we know them also, even though we hate to admit it. It's called employer and employee. One of the two is always the wealthy, the other one isn't. One of the two has the power, the other one doesn't. And one of the two keeps going until those at the bottom don't permit it anymore. And then what? The system goes. The difference between socialism and capitalism is very different from the difference between capitalism, feudalism, and slavery. In all of those three, you have this dichotomy, the people on top and the people on the bottom. What the socialist dream always was, and the socialist objective, was to have an economic system that did not divide people into two conflict-ridden groups, employer,
30
employee,
seconds left.
lord, serf, master, slave. The goal, the dream, the objective of socialists has been to create an economic system in which the enterprise that produces goods and service is democratic. Everybody has one vote, gets together and decides what to produce, how to produce, where to produce, and what to do with the fruits of the collective labor. That's a fundamentally different system, and it would never tolerate the inequalities and instabilities that are endemic to capitalism.
Professor Walter, your response?
Yes, Richard might well be right that there's never been any pure laissez-faire society, that we always had more or less crony capitalism. I'm not sure, I'm not a historian. I suspect in various little small areas of the economy, we've had pure capitalism. When I bought that pen, I think that was pure capitalism, but let's suppose he's right, that there is no such thing as pure laissez-faire capitalism. I don't care. I'm defending a platonic capitalism. I'm defending a pure system. And I say my pure system is better than his. Look, there's never been any pure socialism either. Socialism and capitalism are both consist of human beings, and human beings are imperfect. We're the mistake-making animal, and purity, I think, is a diversion. You know, I'm not going to ask him to defend Soviet Union or North Korea or Cuba. He would say, well, that's not the kind of socialism I like. Well, then he shouldn't ask me to defend crony capitalism. That's not the kind of capitalism I like. I would say that in a socialist society, there's no room for capitalism at all, because you're going to have democratic vote and all that stuff. And, you know, I want to set up a capitalism in rich society. There's no room for me. However, in my system, there is room for him. He can set up a kibbutz or a commune or a hippie community or whatever he wants. You know, this Marxist notion is that somehow the employer exploits the employee. The employer isn't always richer than the employee. The employer is not always richer than the employee. There are sometimes the employee is richer than the employer. It's not a synonym to employer rich, employee poor. There are numerous cases. LeBron James is an employee of the NBA. For all I know, he might be richer than some NBA owners. I don't know if it's true, but it could be true. It's not necessarily true that they're richer. And even if they were, so what? I don't care. Just because employers are richer than employees, it doesn't matter. They don't exploit them. It's a voluntary thing. And look, if I divorce my wife, that's coercive, and if she divorces me, it's not coercive. No, neither one is coercive. An employee-employer relationship.
30 seconds left.
Wow, we need more than 3 minutes. An employee-employer relationship is a voluntary one, and if it's somehow bad for the employer to get a divorce from the employee, then it should also be equally bad for the employee to get a divorce from the employer. He's leaving the employer up in the air without his services.
Thank you. Professor Richard, your 3 minutes begins now.
Well, I think you would have a hard time traveling in the circles that I do if you explain to people that the employer can sometimes, maybe, and even you had to search a little bit, be less wealthy than the employee. We both know what the normal situation is. Employers are rich, rich are employers, or the people employers choose, and the rest of us aren't. And it's never been as bad as it is today. People kind of know it. Jeffrey Bezos, who is the richest man, I believe, in the United States, is not an employee, he's an employer. And Amazon warehouse workers are among the lowest paid workers in the country. The poverty of the one in capitalism is the means of wealth for the other. And that's what exploitation has always meant. Let me explain it, since you referred to Marx. Marx's idea was not complicated. When you go to work for a capitalist, the capitalist pays you some money. That's where the voluntary deal comes in. You don't have any wealth. You have no way to make it. So you need to go sell the one thing you have, which is your ability to work. And the employer pays you an amount of money that enables you to live. What does the employer get out of it? He gets the fruits of your labor, your brain, your muscle. And the name of the deal for the capitalist is he gets more value from your brains and muscle than he pays you to be there. And that's called his profit. That's what's in it for him. The name of the game is that you have to be in a position where you, quote unquote, voluntarily enter into an arrangement that gives more to the person who's hiring you than he gives to you. And it isn't difficult to set up circumstances in which some people voluntarily choose to do something which, under other circumstances, they never would. Second point, the socialism I'm in favor of is perfectly comfortable with having some people choose, if they wish to enter into an alternative economic arrangement called capitalism. We don't agree with it, we don't like it, but that's a very different step from outlawing it or blocking it. There would have to be arrangements made so that these two different economic systems coexist with one another. But
30 seconds left.
That could be worked out. It is a bit of a red herring, if you pardon the expression, to connect the conversation of capitalism to socialism in such a way that you end up being the liberal who allows the other, whereas your opponent doesn't fall into that category. We both know that's not necessary, and in my case, it doesn't apply.
Michael Milken made $400 million a year. He was an employee. He might, I'm not sure if his employers had more money or not, but it really doesn't matter whether they're richer or poorer. I'll concede that most employers are richer than most employees, but some might not be, but certainly not any praxeological connection between the two. Look, let's forget about slavery. Let's forget about feudalism. Let's go back to the caveman days. We're all a bunch of cavemen, and nobody is working for anyone else. There's no employer-employee. How do you get to be an employer? Well, what you do is you save up your money. All the other cavemen are out there drinking beer or whatever it is, and you're a caveman, and what you're doing is saving money. And then one day you go to your fellow caveman and say, hey, fellow caveman, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll give you some coconuts or whatever it is that I've been saving up. I don't think they had money then, but come work for me. And the independent caveman makes a deliberation. He says, well, you know, I can make, 5 coconuts a day, but this guy's offering me 6 coconuts a day. And he can do this because of specialization and division of labor and there are economies of scale. That's how employers arise. They don't come from heaven or hell. You would say hell, I would say heaven. But they're just ordinary workers who save up money, and now they can become an employer. Nothing wrong with being an employer. Look, people are always free to set up a commune or a co-op. Let's say I want to make these pens. And it's going to take about a year before I set up a new business. Buying the raw materials, buying the machinery. If a bunch of us set up our company to make these pens, what are we going to do for salary for 1 year before the first pen rolls off the assembly line? We're going to have to mortgage our houses. What the employer does is he gives savings to the people. they could do it themselves. The reason, look, you do have co-ops, Richard, you talk about democracy, one vote for everyone else. Look, suppose your people don't vote for capitalism. We can't have any capitalism. So I think I'm correct in saying there's room in my system for you, but no room in your system for me. What is the second thing that
30 seconds left.
What is the second thing that the employer gives to the employees? Risk-taking. Suppose these pens don't sell. I can't go back to my employees and say, hey, guess what? I got bad news for you. That salary I gave you the first year, give it back to me because the pens didn't sell. No, I'm the risk bearer. So the evil employer gives a year's worth of stuff to set up the factory and then bears the risk. He deserves every penny of profits that he can get.
Thank you. Mr. Richard, this is your final 3 minutes. Just letting you know.
I appreciate my counterpoint here. The effort to make an employer virtuous has been haunting capitalism from the beginning. Whether you go back to Senior, Adam Smith, David Ricardo, countless others, they always understood, as he does, that there's something morally suspect that has to be cleaned up by stories invented to attribute virtue. The history of the birth of capitalism out of feudalism is a history of blood and violence, revolution, the destruction of peasantries, the enclosure movement in England. You did not have this lovely story of the squirrel who keeps the nuts until the winter versus the squirrel who's a profligate spender. The notion that the employer got there by the virtue of spending comes out of Victorian England's desperate effort to come up with a story. It is really, let's call it a reach of extraordinary proportions. Then there's the other thing, the risk. I love that. The risk of the employer. Yes, he risks his capital. What does the worker risk? Everything. He risks moving his family or her family from one place to where the job is. He risks putting his teenage children in the local school. He risks going to work and acquiring whatever the skills are of that job, and then the employer can take it all away from him. Of course, the worker takes risk too. The difference is the employer is risking the money and he has the power to make the big decisions. The worker takes the risk and has no power to make the big decisions, what to produce, where to produce, when to close the business, when to go to a different line of work, when to hike at a different technology. The risks is an invention to try to justify profit. If you really cared about the risk and you wanted to reward the risk, you'd have to reward the worker for the risk he or she takes, but you don't. You just pay them for their labor and you pretend that all the risk lies on one side. These are childlike efforts to put lipstick on what remains a pig. Capitalism is a narrow system benefiting a minority
30 seconds left.
at the expense of the majority. And that's why it is so afraid of democracy, since that is premised on the notion of a majority that respects the minority, but does not subordinate its own fundamental interest to that minority. And that's why capitalism has such a difficult time with democracy.
So this is the final statement. You have the last word, Professor Block, 3 minutes.
I think I've been called a pig, and
No.
I'm kidding. You weren't calling me a pig, but if you were calling me a pig, I embrace pigginess. Oink, oink. Where's my lipstick? I think that piggery is great. We don't have to defend this. It's obviously defendable. I think, Richard, you're forgetting about ceteris paribus. Yes, the employee takes all sorts of risks, but the employer takes the same amount of risks about moving to a neighborhood and having the employees quit on him and being left holding the bag and all that stuff also. But if you hold clear to ceteris paribus, the employer is taking 2 more risks than the employee, namely if it doesn't sell, and also he's coughing up the money initially. Yes, there's been a lot of bloodshed and a lot of fighting, but that's not laissez-faire capitalism, that's crony capitalism. I'm in New Orleans. There was a big fight over Walmart. Should Walmart be allowed to open? And all the Bernie Sanders types who were against billionaires, and they don't distinguish between billionaires who earn their money honestly, like Bill Gates and Michael Milken, and other billionaires who earn it through crony capitalism. In any case, all the hippies and the lefties were saying Walmart is evil, they don't have good working conditions, they don't have health care, they don't have this, they don't like unions. And Walmart wanted to hire 400 people. And there were 5,000 people lining up around the block to get those jobs, to become employees. They would give their eye teeth to become employees. There's nothing wrong with Walmart. Walmart is magnificent. Walmart brought lower prices for consumers, and everyone was afraid, that somehow they'd be racist. Now, I shop at Walmart. Every employee is an African American, and half the customers are African Americans. There's nothing wrong with Walmart. Walmart is an employer, and there are many other employers just like that. And I would say thank God for the pig Walmart and the pig Prof.Block. Marxism is predicated on the labor theory of value, and the labor theory of value is, let me just say, highly problematic. A mud pie and a cherry pie take the same amount of labor to create, and one is valuable and the other isn't. Labor doesn't create all the value. I mean, the Marxists say, well, labor creates all the value. Why do we have interest and profits and stuff like that? Labor doesn't create all the value. That's problematic. I want to thank Richard and Ash for setting up this debate. It was very edifying for participating in with me.
My pleasure. Thank you very much, and I hope we can do it again.
Be safe.
Thank you both.
Bye.